This myth is an extension of the mother of all ham radio myths, that being SWR must be as close to 1 as much as possible or you will lose much of your signal. Now that is not true, especially in a mobile installation. Why? Let's take an example. A mobile installation where the SWR is 10 to 1. I can imagine hams around the world fainting right now, a 10 to 1 SWR. Well, if that's your SWR in a mobile installation, how much do you really lose? Let's look at the example of a CB radio installation. This also applies to ham radio and any other two-way radio mobile setup. So you got your brand new CB radio antenna, which typically comes with 18 feet of coax cable. Why 18 feet? Well, the manufacturer wants to provide you with enough cable to reach from the antenna to the radio. There is nothing magic about 18 feet of coax cable in any installation. That number does not give you a lower SWR. So, according to the instructions, you install the antenna and attach an antenna analyzer. But that's not as expensive as it sounds. You can get a VNA, which stands for Vector Network Analyzer, like this one on Amazon, for less than $100. Or you can go this route. This is a brand called Rig Expert. Kind of does the same thing as a VNA. You can hook one of these up to your antenna and measure SWR and a bunch of other things without having to worry about damaging your transceiver. I don't know how we ever got on the air without these things. So your antenna analyzer measures an SWR of 10 to 1 at 27 megahertz, which is in the CB radio band. High SWR because you've not adjusted the antenna yet according to the instructions. But let's first see how much power you actually lose with a high SWR like that. Let's look at an online coax cable calculator. Let's select as our coax type RG58. I would suspect that's what you typically get with the CB antenna. And there's 18 feet of it here. Line length, frequency, 27 megahertz for the CB band. Load SWR 10 to 1. Power into the line would be 4 watts. That's the typical output of a CB transceiver. And as we all know, no one would ever operate an illegal power amplifier with a CB rig. So let's get our results here. We click calculate, and our total loss, match loss plus SWR loss, is about 1.5 dB. So instead of 4 watts going to the antenna, we have 2.8 watts, let's say 3 watts. Now, is that really a lot of loss? Well, let's look at an S meter. Here's a typical S meter, which you would find in a ham radio rig or CB transceiver. Now, let's say you've got a real good signal. You're getting S9. The other operator says you're S9. Well, what's the difference, let's say, between S8 and S9? That is 6 dB. 6 dB is 1 S unit. Now keep in mind that if your power drops in half, that's 3 dB. So let's say you're running a 100-watt ham radio transceiver. You've got a signal report of S9, and all of a sudden, for some reason, your power drops from 100 watts to 50 watts. Well, then you would go from S9 to S8.5, right about here. Now, do you really think anyone would even notice? Now, in the example that we just considered, on the coax calculator, we had a loss of 1.5 dB. That's only half of 3 dB. So if you had a perfect match on your CB antenna installation and your S9, then all of a sudden your SWR became 10 to 1. It would actually drop to not even 8.5, somewhere between S 8.5 and 9, like right in here. Now, do you really think the operator on the other end would notice anything at all? Of course not. It is insignificant. Now, does this help us to see that spending hours trying to tune a mobile antenna to an SWR of 1 is nonsense? So why is this the case? Even with a high SWR, why is the power loss in a mobile installation so low? Because the coax line is so short. The longer the line, the more power loss, even with a perfect match. Am I advocating running a 10 to 1 SWR in a mobile installation? No. I'd think that if you follow the instructions on installation and tuning the antenna, you can get a more reasonable SWR. So if you've done that and you have some standing waves, don't worry about it. It does not mean you have a bad antenna. It might not be possible to get an SWR of 1, depending on your installation. But what about ham radio operators? Well, they can be just as bad with their fear of SWR. We see things like expensive mobile screwdriver antennas with a huge power-wasting, motor-tuned coil, inefficient hamstick antennas, and so on. I'm not saying don't buy one of those antennas. They work. But there's another way that I think is a much better idea, and that's the mobile installation of a ham who described it on this channel in the comments under one video. I can't find it, but this was his setup. Now, he only works mobile, no base station. And his mobile station consists of a transceiver into an auto tuner and a full-size 8.5-foot CB whip. Now, with that set up, he has worked the world from 10 meters to 160 meters. The auto tuner is in the bed of his pickup truck. Now, he could have also used a desktop remote tuner under a seat. I don't see why that would not work just as well. Now, think about it. With that setup, you have the transceiver seeing a low SWR on all bands and a radiator with no huge motor-tuned, power-wasting coil, no high-loss mobile antennas like ham sticks. When you use ham sticks, when you want to change bands, you have to change the ham stick. Now, those are both examples of coil-loaded, shortened antennas which can have high loss. A big antenna, as close to full size as you can get, is a better antenna. That's the case for both base and mobile installations. Now, maybe you can't stand the thought of a full-size CB 8.5-foot whip on your car or truck. I understand that. Well, then use something else. It'll work. You'll have fun, especially if you stop believing myths about SWR. Consider subscribing to this channel and 73.